Welcome on behalf of JNP and Palestine Action. This meeting is a very important one, a meeting on the UK and the Israeli arms trade. As we speak, many arms trading deals are being realized by those two partners in crime. We've had the offer of the Palestine Action Group, which we are very happy to host tonight, so that we can speak about the one single group that is acting more than all the others put together in promoting BDS against the arms industry in Britain. We will have 4 speakers tonight, 1 from JNP and 3 from Palestine Action, and I will introduce them as they come to speak. I just wanted to say a few words on the background. Selling and spreading death and destruction around the globe, and of course in Palestine and the Middle East, and fighting wars against civilians is Israel's modus vivendi. I've written a recent book about it, published by Verso, and I hope to send you a link to it during the talk. Israel sells to over 150 states a variety of products in this area, and I think it is selling to more countries than any other country does. At least that was correct the last time I checked the figures of the Stockholm Institute. Now, it sells to all, not just sells, but supports all undemocratic regimes. So this is a very interesting form of diplomacy by Israel. And of course, it also means that these undemocratic regimes support Israel at the UN and at other forums. In the past, Israel mainly sold hardware and training, arms training. Now it also covering all areas of the so-called security, military, industrial, political, scientific, medical, chemical, nuclear, and civic. So you all know about NSO, and probably you should also know about another similar company in Israel called Kandiru. Those companies are spying, are helping to spy, selling the software and knowledge to regimes, mainly non-democratic regimes, but not only. So they can do their spying on individuals, on human rights activists, on organizations that support human rights, on critics of Israel, critics of Israel's partners, journalists, media organizations, state officials, embassies. We know of tens of thousands of activists, including myself, for example, who had their phones hacked. There is a list which includes tens of thousands of numbers, but it's not including all the numbers, because it includes the numbers outside of Israel and Palestine, for example. We now know that many Israeli activists are both Jewish and Palestinian nationals are actually on the list, on one list or another. And of course, the Mossad, we don't have the list of who they are actually listening to. But we do know, for example, that the gruesome murder of Jamal Khashoggi was organized after his mobile and the mobile of his girlfriend were hacked. Many dictatorial and autocratic regimes spy on the critics and opponents in this way. During the Trump years, relations with Israel included a contact with NSO Kandiru, as a matter of course. When Netanyahu came to sign the so-called Abraham Accords, the normalization of Zionism in the Arab world, representatives of both companies came on the same plane to sign deals, for example. It's part of having a relation with Israel. Now, there are many uses of arms sales. This is, for example, a way of getting diplomatic support, which I've related to. This was the method of getting the African and Asian young states to support Israel in the 1960s. Everyone knows about the relations with Idi Amin, but less is known about the triangle of Israel, South Africa, and Iran. Israel supported the two states in their efforts to get nuclear weapons. Ironically, Israel had no way of knowing about the fall of the Shah and what will happen later on. So this is, the funny side of history of this specific relationship. Now, of course, they have special relations with the BRIC giants, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, all of which have arms trade with Israel, and hence are not likely to join political and diplomatic moves against it, either in the UN or in another arena. And I want to say a few words about the Israeli military-industrial academic complex. This is financed mainly by the lavish support of the US and the EU, much of it in the form of technologies and knowledge transfer and bilateral agreements on arms trade. The UK, of course, sells to Israel and buys from Israel. It's totally bilateral. The same is true about the American regime. Israel sources such technologies mainly in the US, UK, France, and Germany. This is why the struggle against Israeli settlements, war crimes, and apartheid must be spearheaded by a campaign in such countries against those companies who supply Israel. For example, we are tonight going to talk about all the companies that supply Elbit in the UK. This is why this is so important. Palestine Action is the main organization behind such actions against Israeli military-industrial targets in the UK. We have heard recently that they have sold their interest in the Oldham factory supplying parts for military drones, such as the ones used by the Azerbaijanis in the recent conflict with Armenia last year. There are 9 other such factories in the UK. They should be also closed. The first speaker this evening is Dr. Les Levidow. He is a veteran of political activity in support of Palestine. He's been involved in several Palestinian solidarity groups since the 1980s. His current ones include Jewish Network for Palestine and the British Committee for the Universities of Palestine, BRICA. Take it away, Les.
Thanks for this opportunity. Firstly, congratulations to Palestine Action on the recent victory when Elbit announced that it would be selling its Oldham factory, which has been making drones for Israel, especially for attacking Palestinians. Let's look back to the year 2005, when the Palestinian civil society groups issued its call for BDS. This asked everyone to undermine international support for the Israeli colonial settler apartheid regime, beyond simply protesting against Israel. Why did they make that request? Some say because major world powers have not acted against Israel's war crimes. Well, of course, that's true, but this is less a failure than a commitment by those powers to do the opposite, namely to support or at least collude with that regime. The euphemistically called international community has systematically colluded with the regime. So here I would like to speak about why the UK arms industry is so important to Israel, Britain, and their long-time partnership in war crimes. The UK-Israel partnership has analogies with UK support for other terrorist regimes that likewise oppress their own populations, especially ethnic minorities and indigenous peoples. More generally, they target anyone who resists the plunder of labor and natural resources. Within that big picture, the Zionist settler colonial project has had a long history and acquired a special role. Britain's commitment goes back to the 1917 Balfour Declaration, promising a homeland for the Jews. This served as a euphemism for a British colonial outpost. In 1916, a colonial administrator drew an analogy between the Orange State of Northern Ireland and a future Jewish state in Palestine, which he called a little loyal Jewish Ulster in a sea of hostile Arabism. In other words, the settler population would feel dependent on and would be materially dependent on Britain as an imperial sponsor. The British Empire initially saw the Zionist movement as potentially destabilizing its control, but it saw Arab anti-colonial resistance as a much greater threat. Hence, the Zionist military forces served as partners with the British Army for suppressing the Palestinian revolt during 1936 to 39. This partnership trained the Zionist forces for the 1948 Nakba and weakened the Palestinian resistance, thus facilitating their mass expulsion. Now let's fast forward a couple decades. The new Israeli state promoted a public image of exporting agricultural products as a showcase for supposedly making the desert bloom, which of course was dependent on stealing land and water from the Palestinians. But strategically more important has been Israel's counterinsurgency expertise, which it has exported to oppressive regimes worldwide since the 1980s. Israel soon emerged as a high-tech innovator of surveillance systems to monitor and intimidate the indigenous Palestinian population. These surveillance systems collect information for various uses, such as blackmailing Palestinians to become informers, spying on political activities, and sometimes assassinating them. Palestine has been an ideal laboratory for testing these new systems as an extra selling point in global exports. Britain has been a major exporter of arms to Israel, which has amounted to something like £500 million between 2015 and 2020. UK manufacturers boast, quote, that the fingerprints of British ingenuity can be found on warplanes dropping bombs on Gaza. So the laboratory works both ways for exports in both directions. Sometimes the surveillance technology is called dual use technology, implying that a military use may be added to the original civilian use. But this is a false distinction for a regime that treats an entire population as a security threat. Indeed, security is the national religion of Israel, involving an emotional identification with the state. So that's where I started before. So you can splice that. Oh,
You're missing the next bit.
oh, but I thought you were going to splice that into
Yeah. Okay,
the
so
other half.
this was your talk, yeah?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's where I started.
Yeah, can you mute a minute?
Okay.
Thank you, Les, for a very capable and informative introduction of this session. And now we have three guests. I will present them one by one as they speak. The first one is Huda Ammori, who is a Palestinian, is of Palestinian and Iraqi descent. I'll start again. Thank you, Les, for an excellent introduction to today's session, which has been very informative. And what is going? Sorry, I can't see my screen well. Thank you, Les, for an excellent introduction for our audience today. And now we have three guests, and I'll introduce them one by one as they speak. The first one is Huda Ammori. Huda is a Palestinian and Iraqi descent, an active campaigner against the military-industrial complex and Israel's apartheid regime. She is a co-founder of Palestine Action, a direct action network targeting Israel's largest private arms company, Elbit system. Huda, it's yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to say a big thank you to the Jewish Network for Palestine for supporting Palestine Action from day one and for hosting this webinar, and to many people on this call that I can recognize their names who've been involved either directly or indirectly with Palestine Action, and that is very much appreciated. So a lot of what I was going to say, Les covered, but I will go into other things instead. So I'd like to talk about a bit about my own background and what got me involved in activism for Palestine. So I am a, one moment, I think I have to pin, but okay. So I am of Palestinian and Iraqi heritage, as Professor Haim mentioned before. Actually, my great-granddad in early 1920s, which I realize is probably 100 years from today, was shot and killed by a British soldier during the British Mandate of Palestine. And this left my great-grandmother, a single pregnant woman at the time in Palestine, who was carrying my grandfather. This came shortly after the Balfour Declaration, which is, of course, I'm sure everyone here is aware, was issued by the British government in 1917, so over 100 years ago, basically calling for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, which is exactly what happened. And I won't go over the Nakba because obviously that's been talked about, and I know again many people here will know about that. But it was actually in 1967 when my own father was in the front room of his house with his younger brothers and siblings, and the Israeli military came and started shooting into the home. And the way that they managed to escape was basically by crawling at the back of their own house with just the clothes they had on at the time and no shoes on, and ran and hid in caves for several days, and eventually made their way over to Iraq. And my mother came from a very poor family in Iraq. They met, etc., and came over here, and I was brought up here. So for me, growing up in Britain, I was always exposed to both sides of the coin, so to speak. I was exposed to British communities, British culture, and at the same time, I was always very aware of Britain's role in Israel's apartheid regime and in and the privilege that I had over my family. Both of my families are quite big families. Who most of my mom's family have been in Baghdad throughout the US-UK invasion. We lost contact with them for several months, not knowing if they were dead or alive because of the invasion that happened over there. And the experience of my younger cousins was certainly drastically different to my upbringing here. So I was always very aware that I was extremely lucky, and my brothers were extremely lucky, and the rest of my family were in completely different circumstances. And I think this really came to a head when I was growing up, and got into university and started campaigning, and found out that Elbit were actually operating in Oldham, being Israel's largest arms company, which were literally building weapons which are tested on Palestinians, not far from where I'd grown up for most of my life in Britain. So for me, that was a massive shock and quite disturbing. It was around the same time I found out that my university was actually investing millions of pounds into companies like Caterpillar, who supply the Israeli army with bulldozers, which are weaponized and used to demolish Palestinian communities in order to build the ever-expanding illegal Israeli settlements. So here I found out about the university's complicity, about an arms company down the road, and it's suddenly your eyes start to open and you start to realize that actually the connection is not just historical, but it's very much continuing today and is getting further entrenched in some ways, from universities investing hundreds of millions of pounds across the UK to pension funds investing billions of pounds into such companies, and to literally Israel's largest arms company being able and welcomed by the British government to build these weapons, which are used to destroy people's lives in Palestine and across the world. And Les went into quite some depth about Elbit, so I don't want to repeat that, but there's a couple of extra things. So Elbit have actually been contracted to supply the very same technology to the British police force. They want to phase out helicopters and basically introduce this technology to be able to, again, as mentioned before, surveil and spy on all of us, using that same technology, which has, of course, been developed by Israel and developed by testing it on the captive population of Gaza. In addition to that, the UK is also contracting Elbit to supply these drones to surveil and stop refugees and migrants from basically being able to seek refuge here in Britain. So it's this constant cycle of war, so to speak, from destroying people's lives in the Middle East and across the world. And then when people are fleeing from these weapons or from the oppression, then the same company is again profiting from stopping them from being able to even seek safety. I mean, it's just that sickening. So for myself, and I think for many other people, I was involved in different campaigns, from divestment campaigns. I went on to work at PSC, lobbied countless MPs, always got the same response, which was, you know, I won't even give it the attention it deserves, even, you know, the responses you get, but it wouldn't be, there was no political will, and that was quite obvious. There was no political will for them to impose sanctions on Israel, which is what's so necessary and so needed at this time, and has been for a long time. And the situation in Palestine only gets more urgent. And yet our government is continuing their complicity and continuing to support Israel in doing what they were doing. And it became very obvious that even though we were getting some victories along the way, for example, I'm sure many people here are involved in the HSBC campaign. HSBC, you know, not known as the world's most ethical bank, even though they'd like to brand themselves as such, actually divested from Elbit just a couple of years ago, just showing just how bad Elbit really is, if even HSBC were willing to divest from them. And there were many different victories to that effect, universities pulling out investments, but at the same time, it wasn't matching the severity of Israel's apartheid regime, and it wasn't matching, we basically needed to start to try and create an intolerable level of resistance against Israel's apartheid regime and its weapons factories here in Britain. And of course, that came in the formation of Palestine Action, which was basically aimed at saying, well, we're sick and tired of this. We're sick and tired of begging the same politicians, of going through the normal routes, whilst we know that companies are operating here who are literally building weapons which are going to be used against the Palestinian people, are already been developed on the Palestinian people. And I think when you realize actually we have such a massive ability to impact these operations, you know, it's given us, it's a massive opportunity for us to actually materially target Israel's apartheid regime and a tool it uses by these factories and plants being placed in our towns and cities and within reach of us, and we are definitely able to go and disrupt them to climb onto their buildings, to blockade their gates, to throw red paint and to destroy the weapons in their factories, and really create a sustained amount of pressure in order to pressure Elbit into leaving for good. And of course, we saw this this week with Elbit leaving Oldham, which is a tremendous victory for everyone involved, and of course, most of all, for the people of Palestine. But it also shows that it works. Direct action does work. A lot of people put themselves on the line in order to get that win. A lot of people pushed forward and persisted despite repression and not having necessarily the support we needed, even sometimes from our own side. But the point was, when you know that factories are making such monstrous weapons, it's the most logical thing to actually just go and stop it, especially when you've tried everything else. We've done the petitions, we've done the lobbying, we've done asking the councils to pay attention. And if they're not going to do it, we have an ability to do it ourselves. And I think that's what was shown this week with the victory in Oldham. And obviously, this wasn't the campaign on Palestine Action. I'm going to end up talking over other people's talk, so I will stick to my part here, because I know Joe and Richard are going to talk more about direct action and Palestine Action overall. But I will just show, if I can share my screen, I think I can, a updated map of Elbit. So of course, this was Elbit's factory in Oldham, which was one of 5 factories and is now shut down. Now this leaves us with all of these other sites. So there's 3 factories in the Midlands. One in Leicester, I'm sure people have seen the actions there. One in Shenstone, which has been targeted again several times, and one in Tamworth. So Stafford is kind of a hotspot for Elbit. Well, actually, people may not know this, but the main person is called David Bird, and he's basically the risk manager for Elbit, who deals with our cases, so to speak. He's the one who gives evidence on behalf of Elbit in our court cases, even though he's never been called up to date because it's not got that far. But he was actually ex-chief of Staffordshire Police up until 2015, so he was there when other protesters were on the roof of these factories in 2014, knew what was happening, and then actually retired from the police force and straight away got a job at Elbit. And we've also seen a difference in policing when it comes to Staffordshire, and how much harsher they are and how much more better they are with Elbit themselves. They've actually got in some of their factories in Stafford, drones placed nearby Elbit's factories ready for deployment for when activists go on the roof. And they have, again, a 5 to 10 minute police response time for these factories. So, it shows how embedded the state really is with Elbit systems, but nevertheless, we can still win. And of course, in Kent, there is another massive factory for Elbit. They do have 2 headquarters in this country, which, for any company, you'd think you only needed 1 in Britain, but they have 2, 1 in London and 1 in Bristol. And of course, they also operate in 3 different Royal Air Force sites. The majority of our campaign to date has been focused on all of their factories and their offices. And after the win in Oldham, it means we can definitely focus more on the remaining factories, and hopefully we can do that with everyone here joining us and supporting us in whichever way you can. And of course, financially would be great if you could give financial support as well. So I think I'll move on to Joe, and then Joe, I'm happy to play the video before or after you speak. I'll leave it to you to decide.
Thank you very much, Huda. An excellent presentation, and I think you clarified the complexity and also the courage and commitment necessary for doing the important work that you're all doing. Joe Wilkes is, he says that he's a newish but enthusiastic Palestine Action volunteer, active in 2 trade unions, UCU, the academic trade union, and AMU. would like to see links between friendly political groups, libertarian socialist groups, and direct action groups. Would like to avoid hospital and prison. We all hope that you will avoid both of those institutions. Here to listen and learn, but here to speak as well, please.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So maybe we'll do the video after then, since you've introduced me now. I'll speak only for a couple of minutes about direct action, and then perhaps then we can watch the video before Richard. Yes, so I do want to avoid hospital and prison, but so far I've only been able to avoid prison. So I did have a bit of an accident at an occupation at the end of last year. But I think we will all avoid prison, even if we do go to trial. I'm not going to talk about it now, but perhaps Richard could talk a little bit about the court victory that we had last year. I don't think anyone would be going to prison for occupying a factory, but if anyone does, if anyone had to do a short sentence, I'm sure that wouldn't be the end of the world or really derail us for very long. So I'm just going to speak very quickly about direct action, just because it's just such a great topic. And Richard usually talks about this, and he's really good at talking about it. So I'm going to steal all his best lines. So yeah, Les mentioned the Green Party, and he said that it would be a different story talking about the Labour Party. I'm going to talk quickly about that because I was a member until recently. I've stopped paying my subscription now, but you know, I joined when Jeremy Corbyn got elected, not just because of Corbyn's stance on Palestine, and you know, maybe he would have rescinded the export licenses. I don't know, but obviously it was a really happy time when he got the leadership. I was actually in the Hebron at the time when the election was happening for the Labour Party leadership, and I wasn't able to vote for him because I didn't have a very good internet connection. But I did join the Labour Party when he got the leadership, and that was a very happy time. And then that's all gone kaput, and I won't go over that big story that I'm sure we've all followed about, you know, all of that nasty stuff. I was in a planning meeting for Palestine Action in October, and I had a Labour Party, and it was at 7 o'clock, and at 7:30 I had a Labour Party meeting, and they were both online, obviously, both Zoom meetings, and I couldn't open the Labour Party meeting on a different device, and I just thought, bugger it, I'm just, you know, I'm in a Palestine Action meeting about doing something concrete, which was an action. I can't even log on to the Labour Party meeting, which would have only been to put up my hand to vote for a delegate to do something or other. So I just thought, right, I'll just stick with direct action for now on, or at least for the foreseeable future. So Richard divides direct action into 3 sections. Talks about sacrifice, dilemma, and disruption. So yeah, I think we try, and I made some notes actually. I'm not gonna share screen. I'm just gonna. So we try and be disruptive with everything we do. So we're not just doing a kind of symbolic occupation. We're really trying to damage Elbit's profits by shutting them down for a day or for more. And I think Leicester was closed down for 6 days last year. And I wasn't involved in Palestine Action then, but I watched that story and I thought, this is amazing. The story about the fire brigade refusing to take them down, I thought this is incredible. And then through a mutual friend, I contacted Palestine Action. So being disruptive is like really important to for us. It's not just symbolic. We really want to hit their profits, and I think that's really important. It's not just to kind of look good, or to get or it's not just about getting press attention either. I think that's really frustrating. The press sort of are the problem in some ways, and it sort of feels a bit bad trying to chase press all the time. So I think it's really important that people understand that we're really trying to cost Elbit money, and also there has to be like a sacrificial element. it's great if people can see that people have sacrificed their time and sometimes their personal liberty to occupy a factory. And we hope that people find this inspiring and perhaps want to get involved as well. Even if people aren't sure what the issue is, or they don't know much about Israel-Palestine, if they see people getting arrested, if they see people getting carried down off a roof, this is really important to us. And then finally, we hope that this creates a dilemma for Elbit. The dilemma for them is, are they going to shut down? Are they going to move on? Are they going to just ignore Palestine Action and hope we go away? Are we going to try and convict them and risk the media exposure of that and the possibility of just inspiring more people to join Palestine Action? So we're really about trying to create some sort of tension through all of that. And that's an ongoing story, and we don't know how that's going to end, but we hope that that ends in obviously more factories closing down. So yeah, so I think it was just a sort of a bit of an unhappy experience finally in the Labour Party with regard to Palestinian politics. And I think that I think I felt a bit forced into direct action. You know, I tried the other stuff, and you know, and I know there's other organisations that do good work that Huda was alluding to that she's worked for. But this is direct action is easily the most effective thing we can do. It's the best bang for buck, as one of our members said the other day. And all great changes seem to come from direct action of one kind or another, particularly strikes historically. I'm in a couple of trade unions, as Haim mentioned at the beginning. So yeah, I think that for those of us that can, if we can concentrate our time on occupations and other forms of direct action, lock-ons, stuff like that, and try and help finance those things, I think that's the most effective thing that we can do. And I think that might mean that in the foreseeable future, we close down Elbit. And if we close down Elbit, that's a huge win in, you know, it has geopolitical ramifications, we hope. So I think that's all I want to say about direct action. Really, as you said, I'm just an enthusiastic new member, and I'm really pleased to be able to do things that are concrete and you know, and see these victories happen, which we've had at the beginning of this year. It's been absolutely incredible, and a court victory at the end of last year. Absolutely amazing. Things are going really well. So, you know, we're hoping to just get a lot of new members and really go for it this year. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Shall I play the video?
I don't enjoy climbing dodgy, rickety ladders up 2 stories and sleeping out in the freezing cold up here. And I don't, believe it or not, I don't enjoy smashing things up. It's not how I operate, how I've worked all my life. I'm 69 years old. I'm an old age pensioner. I don't want to be up on this bloody cold roof. I don't enjoy climbing dodgy, rickety ladders up 2 stories and sleeping out in the freezing cold up here. And I don't, believe it or not, I don't enjoy smashing things up. It's not how I operate, how I've worked all my life.
Elbit is Israel's largest private arms company, and they manufacture 85% of Israel's drone fleet, which are used against Palestinian civilians.
The UK government is complicit in war crimes that are being enabled by the weaponry that is made in factories just like these.
I've written to my Member of Parliament, I've gone on marches, I've signed petitions, and nothing seems to work. I think direct action is the only way to disrupt this kill line, and we're demanding that the government ends its complicity with apartheid Israel and with the murderous Elbit system.
Your profits are covered in Palestinian blood! Elbit market their weapons as battle tested. That is, battle tested on the innocent people besieged in Gaza.
Recently, Elbit sold a so-called suicide drone to the Azeri government, and these weapons are being used against Armenian civilians in Artsakh. They sell arms to the Indian government, who use them against civilians in occupied Kashmir.
We have to take a stand against this, because if we just look the other way, the bloodshed and the oppression will continue, and that's not something that sits well on my conscience. So that's why I'm here smashing a few windows. It's nothing in comparison to what Palestinians are going through when those drones are flying overhead at night, when their houses are being bombed, when their family members are being murdered.
I guess they're not getting us down that easy.
I guess not today.
Thank you very much, Huda and Joe, for showing us, for what you said, for what you've done, and for the video that clarifies how difficult all this is to actually go through, and how most of you would like to do other things than break windows, but that option was not given to us. I now want to invite the last speaker, Richard Barnard, who is a co-founder of Palestine Action, but also active in both environmental and anti-nuclear movements. He has been arrested for direct actions many times in the UK and mainland Europe, often targeting the military-industrial complex, including actions at nuclear bases and against Elbit systems. In this year, been found not guilty twice by the Crown Court juries in high-profile environmental cases. We hope this is going to happen also in the case against Elbit. Richard, can you turn your telephone, because you're on the side, so to speak?
Is that better?
Thank you, that is better.
Okay, and you can hear me okay, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I echo my comrades, and thank you for inviting us. I just want to describe a little bit about what Palestine Action is and how it was formed. So we're a network. We're a network of concerned individuals and groups that agree to abide by our very few rules, basically, as long as you, as Joe pointed out, disrupt this company and stop it operating. And we came together, and I'll pick up on a little bit what Joe said. We came together because there'd been direct action against Elbit systems going back to 2014 in England and Wales. And but you know what? When Joe talked about that dilemma, there was no dilemma for Elbit systems and the police, even with direct action. It was sporadic. We would do it. I myself had been inside a factory, graffitied in front of the police, and they said, you can go home at the end of the day. We're not even going to arrest you. And this was because that dilemma was not there. There wasn't a sustained campaign. And for us, when we came together, it was like we did this once a year. Elbit could cope with it. And actually, a group of us had decided we need to step this up. If we want to win, and we want to win, we're fed up with there not being wins. And the Palestinian people are fed up with living how they live, after being forced to live, and not winning. So we came together, and it was a few concrete things. One, we were going to do direct action, and direct action only. As Joe's pointed out, that's what drives the movement forward. But also crucially for us, right? I'm a council estate kid. I left school at 15, and we needed to keep the message simple. Obviously, we know that the Israeli apartheid regime tried to confuse things and talk about two sides and what have you. And even our comrades in the Palestine movement have made things confusing by making it over-intellectualized. And Angela Davis, in one of her books, says, keep it simple, right? For me, I got involved in anti-Elbit and pro-Palestine stuff because I live next to a factory. This is the most evil of the evil companies, as we heard beautifully described by the professor and by Huda. Okay, it's really simple. And if you keep the message simple and give a simple art, we're going to actually concretely make a difference by doing this. It brings in so many people. And what I'd say for Palestine Action is we have predominantly young people, predominantly women, trans folk, non-binary folk, and Muslims. okay? And this is because we've kept the message very simple and kept our targets focused. If we want to win, we must focus on one company at a time, and the most evil of the evil being Elbit Systems, that everyone from the environmental movement to animal rights groups to faith groups join in and take part. For us, that is a key element on that. And when we look at that and we think about that, and that very famous quote by Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is only that ever has. For us, that was key. Most of our actions have involved a small group of people. In Oldham, for instance, yes, we had a community mobilization week in and week out, but we had 36 people arrested, and that was enough to get rid of the factory. And as we saw in that video from Nick, it's all kinds of people. We've had 17-year-olds, we've had 74-year-olds. There's a place for everyone within this movement. And I'm thinking about this and how it was we won. There's some crucial things. Obviously, we need to be organized and do stuff. But you know what? I've been in lots of groups who talk a good game, but they never get on the pitch and play it. And actually, there's a crucial element of less talking and more doing. So be organized and do that. But take risks is the second thing. You know, Joe was very humble. He took a massive risk and it involved him having a serious injury. But we have to take risks to match the severity of what is happening to the Palestinians. And taking risks might mean, if you've never been arrested before, if you've never done an action before, maybe that means for you taking a risk is going outside a factory and being a lock-on box, or even joining arms to stop it happening. Remembering disruption is key. If you've done a lock-on before, maybe it's time for you to climb on a roof. If you've been on a roof before, maybe it's time to go inside and damage the machinery. You must take risks. And for us, crucially, the third element, and to nick a phrase off Nike, is to just do it. We can talk too much about, oh, let's get this perfect, let's do this, it's got to be right. But actually people, and especially young people today, with the movements like Extinction Rebellion, with how things are, people are fed up with governments, are fed up with the political systems, and people just want to do something rather than nothing, even what it is. One of our first actions, we just ran into a factory and went in. And that links to me to an important element for us, our cycle of how we change things. Action comes first. Action must always come first. And then that brings awareness. And then obviously that brings education and planning, and that spiral goes on to more action and more action. The problem is if we don't do action first, and we learn this from movements in, say, Southern America, liberation movements there, it's the action that comes first. And we see that in our own movement. In Leicester, there wasn't a massive movement, Leicester, to educate the population. Okay, most of that population already know and support Palestine. What was needed was some brave souls to climb up a ladder and get on a roof, and then 1,000 people came on the streets. That's how we mobilize people. Take action first. For us, that is key. And really, I want to keep it very simple and kind of end there. And for me, really, there's a phrase by the late, great David Graeber. There's two phrases for him. He's that good. I'm going to quote two phrases. The first one is, protest is like begging the powers that be to dig a well. And direct action is digging the well yourselves and daring them to stop you. And finally, he says, direct action is the insistence when faced with structures of unjust authority, of acting as if you are already free. And we act, and everyone in Palestine Action acts as though we are already free, and we will bring about the end of Elbit Systems by all of us taking risks, just doing it, and acting as though we're free. So I encourage everyone here, whoever you are, whatever role you can take part, to act as though you're free, to join Palestine Action, to get outside and disrupt them, to donate whatever it is that you are able to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for a very powerful presentation. And I want to start the Q&A, but just also to tell you that Ken Loach, who is actually working on a film in the north and could not actually join us, sends us his greetings for the success of the following actions. We can always count on Ken Loach. Yeah, Lottie Collett, could you ask your question?
Yes, certainly. Hi, it's for Richard. And Richard, my daughter is one of your activists, Buffy, who was at, I've lost, at Hiram DevTech. So really, I was just wondering if we have any update on court cases, anxious mother, obviously, and really wondering how we can show more solidarity. The guys had their pre-trial hearing on Friday and there was no one there. So it would be really nice to see more solidarity at trials.
Yeah, thank you for that. And your daughter, and no doubt you, by bringing her up that way, is amazing. She's an amazing thing. Update on the trials, obviously, is we had the first trial in December, and it was a magistrate's court, and we won. And obviously, in a magistrate's court, you're just before often an old English system, so you just have a judge or a part-time judge, whereas in Crown Court, which I think Buffy will be in, there's a jury, so much more, and percentage wise of any crime, you're much more likely to be found not guilty in a Crown Court rather than that. Certainly we've put out details of trials, and we can definitely rally many people. There's lots of people in that area. I think that court is in Chester, is it, or Runcorn, and there's lots of people in the Liverpool area. So when it comes to actual trial, I imagine that there'll be a good lot of people out there. And I think that solidarity at trials, having people outside supporting, I think is really key. One, and mainly for those people on trial, being someone who's been on trial twice this year, having supporters there just reminds you that you did the right thing and supports that. It can also obviously have greater, wider sort of implications for bringing people in, people realizing that those trials are on. And then obviously legally, we don't know exactly what's going to happen going forward in terms of those things, but we're finding more and more that defences, because I think it's worth mentioning in terms of legalities, we have defences under law in British law to say what we've done is correct. The law of necessity preventing further more crime, and often in respect of cases, especially that involve criminal damage or trespass or aggravated trespass, you have those available defences to you that you may not have in, say, environmental actions that are not targeted against complicit companies. So we have a strong legal team working on that. We have most of our cases with one solicitors of ours in Brighton, and we have barristers who've literally written the books on protest law, and this is the area of law, protest law, who are instructed on those cases. So obviously we would hope, both for our activists and for the movement generally, that we continue to win cases. And also I'd just say at this time it's quite tricky, because with COVID and everything, cases are just getting put back and back and back. So myself and Huda and some others were meant to go on trial in May last year, and conveniently, whilst Gaza was unfortunately being bombed, the trial got put back a year. So we often see these major delays. And I think it's really good to put out. I don't know whether Huda's got more, she's much cleverer than me, and she might be able to interject some ideas on the legal strategy and stuff as well.
Go on, Huda.
I'll just be brief because I think you covered it quite well. I think for on many levels, courts are, on one level, it's an unfortunate consequence of taking this type of action, but on another level, it's actually a massive opportunity to expose these companies and their links with war crimes in the court system, and putting, the information to a jury. And we've seen it in many cases before where a jury has found people not guilty because, comparing, criminal damage, so to speak, on a factory compared to the criminal damage that these weapons cause, not just damage, but literally destruction of people's lives. You can't really compare the two. So that's mostly what our defences are based on. I'd apologise if there wasn't support outside. There are quite a lot of court cases going on, and sometimes hearings brought in last minute that the support team in Palestine Action aren't made aware of. I think for the vast majority of cases they are, but I have to encourage others as well who are who follow to check out our website, palestineaction.org/Elbit-on-trial. We have a list of all upcoming trials on there, and to sign up to our mailing list as well, because often there are changes in trials last minute, and you will be updated through our social media or through the email list on that. But there are court cases, I think there are 13 court cases, 11 of which are Crown Court cases coming up, supposed to be coming up in the next 6 months. There have been numerous delays on those, but it is part of the fight against these companies, is winning those court cases, and the support is a crucial part of that.
There are 2 other questions which I have here. Could Otis Zach ask his question?
Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for holding this space. Yeah, just a couple of questions. So first of all, for people who have full-time work commitments and don't live close to Elbit factories, what's the best way that we can support Palestine Action and their work? And then the second question just was what's the best way to stay in contact with Palestine Action moving forward from today?
Who wants to answer it?
I can go.
Yeah.
I would say if you go on our website, you should, I will post some links in the chat shortly once I'm able to, but you can sign up and fill a form on our website. There are numerous different things you can do to support. And also if you are considering risking arrest and taking direct action, you know, there are time frames and you can plan things in advance enough that you can actually get that time off that you need to be able to do those type of things. But even in other ways, there are a number of ways that people can help, if it's financially, if it's logistics wise, if it's supporting activists, if it's, you know, making calls and doing workshops. All of those things are a crucial part of the movement. If you sign up and you put your number in into the form, then you should get a call relatively soon, and then you can go on workshops and introduce to the movement and find your role within it. But I will put that link in the chat shortly.
Ron, yeah, go on.
Can I just add on to that? Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And when we run workshops as well. So once people have filled those in, we run a workshop on direct action, on media, and on arrest preparation as to what might happen. And I suppose it's worth saying that, you know, no one is like full-time activists in Palestine Action. They're just regular folks, whether they're retired, whether they're working. This is the thing. So as well as there being lots of different things to do, come along to the workshops, see what you're comfortable doing, explore it, ask people's questions, and yeah, get involved. It'd be great.
Yeah, please, Otis, do one of our workshops. They're really informative and interesting. And a lot of people only do what they perhaps just do one action because of work commitments and because of the inconvenience of getting arrested. And that's great. There's loads of people who just appeared and just do one action, and then they maybe do a bit of arrestee support in the future, or, you know, supporting people outside a courtroom, as that lady was just talking about. So yeah, please sign up, and we'll see you at a workshop.
I assume the workshops are online, and that one can find out about them on your website.
That's agreeing.
Yeah, if people sign up, we do is it the first ones are on a Wednesday, aren't they, Richard? Is it? Are we trying to do them every Wednesday?
Yeah, at the moment we're doing them every Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Right. Oh wow.
But they're not publicly advertised, so you would have to join and fill in the form, as Joe said.
Okay, that's clear. Ron Mandel, can you ask your questions to the panel?
Yes, I think my question is probably best suited for Les. And the motivation behind my question is I know that Israel, besides exporting technology, has been training police. They did so in many police forces in the United States and apartheid South Africa. So I was just asking, is there any evidence of cooperation between the Israeli police and the UK counterparts in the form of handling protests, interrogation techniques, or general police training?
Les, can you unmute?
Well, I've heard about such connections, but I haven't investigated it myself. So perhaps someone else in this event can tell us more.
Well, Les, you also have a question yourself to the Palestine Action people. Can you ask that?
Yes, well, unless someone wants to volunteer an answer to that question. Very good.
Go ahead, Les, and we might come back to a question, to an answer if it exists.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's an important question, but
sure.
So we heard that the factory occupations helped to mobilize practical support from people in the area or further afield. So I'd like to know more about that. What kinds of practical support? And perhaps creating new kinds of connections among people or among issues.
Go ahead, Huda. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I'll give an example. So I think for us, we are Palestine Action, so we're very action focused, but we've seen the results from that from the local community in a lot of places. One example is Leicester, where actually the factory was relatively well hidden away, and there wasn't always an existing campaign in the area, not one that we knew of, against the factory. And once 4 Palestine actionists went on top of the roof of that factory, it was, I think within a couple of hours, we saw hundreds of people mobilizing from the local community day in, day out for 6 days straight while they were actually occupying the roof. And in total, I think thousands of people came across that time frame. And actually we saw that when the police tried to come and arrest the activists and take them off the roof, the community, and this was families, women and children and young men and a diverse group of people, mostly from, I'd say, the Asian community, came out and actually blockaded and built their own barricades in front of the fences of the factory, and were chaining up the fences to stop the police from being able to take these activists away. And I think for them, they see it as what I think most people would see it as a bit hypocritical that activists are getting arrested rather than rather than shutting down these factories which are producing weapons which are used to kill people, etc. And they in themselves took part in direct action by doing that. And actually when the activists were arrested, several, I think 30 cars followed the police for the police van to the actual local station and waited outside and supported them. And we've seen that quite consistently, that when there's been actions at certain places, the community has mobilized around it, and that the action, being as dramatic as they often are, can actually expose the company and encourage people to take action themselves or to mobilize and protest against the site. But we've also seen, across the country, different local groups working to support these actions, building support on the ground around the factories. And this has been across the board, I think, from Oldham to the Midlands to London, different local groups, Bristol and Brighton. It's quite warming to see how people pull together and have unified around this campaign. So yeah, that's my answer to that.
Can I just add one thing to that? I think we've done, obviously we talked to many comrades in different movements, and we've done a joint action with Extinction Rebellion. We had an action with animal rights group taking over a factory. But I'd also want to say and echo what Huda said there, in that really like formal links and that kind of thing is not something necessarily that speaks to younger groups of people today. It's much more in and out, and that's why we're a network, not a membership movement. And those informal links with community groups, the local community, is very much our way of doing things. So it's not sort of formalized stuff. It's kind of the way that people are these days. They drop in and out of things, as Joe was describing. They do something once and they get involved in something else. Those informal links, which are difficult to describe, but are actually where people are at these days, I think. And those other movements, those mass movements like Extinction Rebellion, are a great example. Like, are people actually members of it, or are people members of Palestine Action? They're just doing the stuff, and it seems to work, I think, is for us the key thing. And obviously we have pivotal members in those local communities who galvanise people. The same was in Birmingham when we did the action there at Arconics, the Grenfell Tire company that was involved in that. The local community mobilises itself, and often these are strong local communities with an identity that come out and take it on. So yeah, it's slightly more sort of nuanced than saying, well, we're going to have a direct link with this organisation and that one.
I'm going to let you ask your question, Robin, for just wait a minute. I wanted to mention that Greg Dropkin and Sarah Sharif have put in the chat, and I've copied this, two links to the links between the Israeli training machine and UK and US police forces. I will invite both of you to speak about this shortly after Robin's question. So Robin, please go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I mean, you can't see me. Hello, Huda and Richard. I wanted to really highlight the fact that it seems to be a massive political disconnect between the Tory government and their protest bill at the moment, which a lot of certainly our members and local Labour members have been up on the demonstrations about the protest and criminal bill, and also the action against Romanies and Gypsies. But the thing is that what's interesting is the disconnect between juries and political disconnect. What infuriated the right-wing Tories is when the juries acquitted the people who took down the Colston statue. There's been a string of other Extinction Rebellion ones, which Richard mentioned vaguely. But what I'm thinking is that there's actually a big political disconnect between what the government is trying to force, and a number of lawyers recently, with them increasing the prison offences for criminal action, have said that just means that the juries will say, well, this action, which has public interest, is actually not going to go. These people should not go to prison. I'm just wondering what you're thinking about the political force of that rather than the legal.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to raise, Robin. And something we definitely noticed, with the bill. And I mean, I think for us in Palestine Action, there isn't much difference with bill or no bill, because obviously we're still being charged with having supposedly committed criminal offences. But to us, we don't commit crimes. We stop the worst crimes that these companies are committing against the Palestinian people and other people across the world. But it is something when we see, the bill, and I think it's massively being used to deter people and to intimidate people from not taking this type of action. But actually, when it gets to the courts, we're seeing loads in the past few months of cases for us in the magistrates, which is quite a shocker, because that's not even a jury, it's just a judge. And the activists in Palestine Action admitted to throwing bottles of red paint. They admitted to blockading the fences, and they were found not guilty based on the fact that, based on the comparison to what they did compared to what Elbit systems do. And a judge said that was more than proportional to do that. But we're also seeing it with jurors. And so whether or not these laws or the political forces can actually be enforced and used to, prison send protesters to prison is a whole different situation. So I think these tactics are mostly used to just try and deter people and intimidate people from taking action. But actually, I think often these things have the opposite effect. And when people are put into a corner and told you can't do this or you're going to get this, even though they know it's the right thing to do, more people are likely to actually rise up and resist against that and take that type of action, exactly the type of action that they don't want us to take. So I do think it will backfire. And for us, bill or no bill, we're not stopping the type of, the actions against Elbit systems.
Richard?
Can I just add to that? I think, in terms of the political climate, we know, for instance, that after just 4 weeks of Palestine Action, that there was a meeting between the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, Benny Gantz, and Dominic Raab, who was then Foreign Secretary, saying you need to crush this movement. Well, they didn't work, did it? And they, I think for us, the key thing on that politically is having more people and a variety of people in our movement. So that they can't crush a movement that's kind of like semi-underground and has lots of people. They can try whatever they like, but as Huda so eloquently put, we keep going, and on the whole, most activists go, whatever the political climate is, we're going to fight back. We're not going to get drawn into sort of the political side of it, because we've got our focus and there's other people fighting that good fight as well. I think they try, but they're not going to win. We're going to win. And I think there's that famous phrase, which goes, first of all, they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they oppress you, and then we win. And we feel like we're stepping into that. We got at least 1 foot into the then we win.
Kate Young has sent a message to the list that you can see about the bill, and there are a number of people that want to ask questions. I will ask you to wait a bit because there is a bit of a queue. Greg Dropkin, can you ask the question?
Can you hear me? I don't have a microphone.
Yes.
You can. That's great. The question I have is whether you see any prospect of using the progress that's being made on Elbit to go back to the university involvement with the arms trade with Israel, which is obviously much wider than Elbit. It involves both investment of university funds, but also the influence of the arms companies on the research that's carried out at the universities. I'm wondering whether or not the fact that you've got a movement here involving a lot of young people now gives the option to go back and take that on. And maybe Joe would comment on that in relation to the UPU or Les or Professor Bresheeth. Is there scope to kind of reopen this? Because it's a big, big issue, in my opinion.
Anyone from Palestine Action?
I'll pass it on, but I'd just like to quickly say that as someone who's just joined, I really like the fact that we just do this one very simple thing, and that we're not, and I think that's what makes, I've been involved in lots of political organizations over decades, and, they fall out over, where you put a colon or whatever, And it's great, it's Palestine Action, because we're sort of not political in a way. It's just we just do one thing. So I'm all for sort of just sticking to that. But anyway, I don't really know too much about that subject.
Can I just say, I wasn't saying that you should stop doing what you're doing. I'm asking whether you think that this situation that you have created opens doors for other types of action.
Oh, well, hope so, yeah.
I think Huda can speak to this more as being someone who, I didn't go to university and is closer to it. The only thing I would say, the caution, is for us, we get lots of students and they want to target Elbit. I think that's what they want to do. And we should sort of respect for those, but that doesn't mean it doesn't open up. And I think Huda could speak much better about this.
Yeah, go on, Huda.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been something we talked about, and we've actually had meetings with students about, Palestine Action universities and if that would be a thing. But I think overall the conclusion was that the thing that has worked so well for Palestine Action from the very beginning has been the singular focus on driving out these factories. I think through the process of targeting Elbit, we expose Israel's arms trade, and through that, then more students, etc., will start to examine and actually hopefully look at their own links with their own universities as a result of that. I think whenever there's one increase in a movement or surge against Israel's arms trade, then people will take it on and adapt it to whatever suits them. But I think for us at Palestine Action, it's worked so far, and I think we're going to continue to focus on Elbit and getting rid of Elbit in this country and making an example out of the one company, because even though we are many people who oppose Israel's arms trade, we are much more effective when we're focused on a singular target, and through that we can then make them all fall like dominoes.
I come in briefly here.
I wanted to say, sorry, this is Ken Loach phoning me. It's too late for him to join, but he's with us. I just wanted to allow Nick George to ask his question. Nick, would you please unmute?
Yeah, I would just like to say that we're born alone in this world, and we're born and we're responsible for ourselves. We're responsible for our own beliefs. And I've done my action, and yes, I'm going to court, and yes, I'm worried about it, and yes, I am worried about going to prison. But at the end of the day, I have to be true to my beliefs, and I mustn't let other people influence those. And I truly believe that what we're doing to Elbit and what Elbit is doing to the rest of humanity, it's more important than anything else. We try and shut Elbit down. And I'm going to be true to my beliefs, and I'm going to do what I can to shut Elbit down. And yes, they may take me to court, they may send me to prison, but at the end of the day, as long as I'm true to my beliefs, that is the most important thing to me. And I hope that gives encouragement to others who, yes, be worried, look into it. Lots of people said to me, well, didn't you think this through? Didn't you think you might go to prison? And I said to them, if I sat down and thought everything through, I would never get off my backside, never stop watching television. You can think things through so far, but just follow your beliefs, and that's the right thing to do, and you will come out on top. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, for making a very important contribution and supporting Palestine Action in the clearest possible manner. There is a question from Stephen Waters. Can you unmute and ask the question, Stephen?
Yeah, often a company who's given into BDS deny it and say it was an unrelated business decision. So has there been any announcement like that from Elbit? I've thought of a quick other question if I've been cheeky and sink it in. Are there any other actions going on in, like, did I hear about maybe one in Germany, maybe one in Italy?
I just wanted to relate to a question before, which because Ken's phone I didn't answer, and that is action in universities. Speaking from SOAS, the student union in SOAS is very active, as you may know, and they've done some really excellent activities over the last year, including blocking SOAS on a certain day because of this, but also trying to and succeeding the disconnection of SOAS from Israeli universities that are working with the army. Haifa University was one case where they supplied Hebrew teaching to SOAS, and some of our staff, including myself and the student union, acted to end this collaboration. So there's a lot that you can do within universities. Remove funding from Israeli companies that the university is investing in. disinvesting. You remember that BDS is not just boycott, but it's also disinvestment. Yeah, so disinvestment is very important, and sometimes the university is invested through a third company, like a pension fund and so on, that has investments in Israel. And some research will discover this, and the action to disinvest from that company can go ahead. So there is a lot that can be done by both students and staff, short of, or not short of direct action, but on top of direct action. I think we need to come to the end of this. So I'm asking people who have another question to put it in the chat, and I think we'll call it a day. I got a message here from Lottie. SOAS Student Union are supporting Buffy and Charlie, who are two of the APPH3. So this is something that all student unions should be doing. And of course, Palestine Action is connected to quite a lot of students, or the other way around. And that we can ask all students to do. I'm sure you are telling them this when they come into touch with Palestine Action. I want to at last thank everyone here. All the four speakers have given us a lot to think about, and a lot to think about what to do next. The fact that there are victories all the time. The BDS movement has started to become mainstream in this year. Now people in Hollywood are actually supporting BDS. They're supporting people attacked by the Israeli embassy here and elsewhere as anti-Semites, when they basically just support Palestinian human rights. So I think we are going mainstream, and this is a very good news, because when we go mainstream, such actions as Palestine Action is taking all the time will be understood and welcomed, and will be not found guilty in any manner in the courts. So I think this is a very important time for all of us to increase our activity. Thank you to all four speakers and to all of you who came to the meeting on behalf of JNP. And I'll close the meeting. Thank you.